quiet stillness of soul society, where the night skies stretched endlessly above the Seirei-tai, stars shimmering faintly against the darkness, one name would someday come to embody both reverence and fear: Aizen Sosuke. To understand his story is to enter into the fragile balance between order and chaos, to walk the thin line between justice and ambition. It is a tale that begins not with noise or destruction, but with calm, with the soft voice of a man who appeared gentle, unassuming, and trustworthy. In those early years, no one suspected that behind the polite smile and calm brown eyes lay a mind sharper than any sword, a will as immovable as steel, and an ambition that reached far beyond the walls of the Seirei-tai. Aizen was once the very image of what a Shinigami should be. He carried himself with kindness, never raising his voice, never appearing angry or impatient. As a lieutenant under Captain Shinji Hirako of the 5th Division, Aizen embodied reliability. He wrote in elegant calligraphy, offered words of reassurance to his comrades, and seemed to always be nearby when others needed guidance. Few men inspired such quiet trust. Yet within him brewed a storm, an ever-growing discontent with the order of the world, with the rules that bound not just soul society, but all of existence. For Aizen, the world as it was had always seemed incomplete, imperfect. From his earliest days, he could not help but wonder why the Shinigami, powerful as they were, bowed to a being like the Soul King, a distant and silent figure who sat as the linchpin of all realities. To Aizen, this was not balance. It was stagnation. And in stagnation, he saw weakness. His mind sharpened these thoughts like a blade, each year bringing him closer to a singular conviction: that if the world could not be perfected as it was, then he would remake it himself. Yet the brilliance of Aizen was not simply in his ambition, but in his ability to conceal it. He mastered the art of deception long before anyone would suspect. His Zanpakuto, Kyoka Suigetsu, was the perfect tool for such a man. With its ability to manipulate the senses entirely, to cast illusions so perfect that one could not distinguish them from reality, Aizen was granted the kind of power few could even imagine. He used this gift not for open conquest, but to weave a web of trust and misdirection that spread through the Seirei-tai. To his captain, Shinji, he was the loyal subordinate. To his fellow Shinigami, he was the dependable ally. To all, he was a man beyond suspicion. And yet, small signs whispered of something more. He would linger too long in the library of the Central 46, studying ancient texts. He asked quiet questions about the Hogyoku, a mysterious orb said to blur the line between hollow and Shinigami. He tested the boundaries of Kyoka Suigetsu on unsuspecting subordinates, though none ever realized they were under its spell. His ambition was not rushed. It was patient, methodical, like a spider weaving its web thread by delicate thread until all paths led back to him. But ambition of this scale cannot remain hidden forever. The first glimpse of Aizen's true nature came during the hollowification incident, 100 years before Ichigo Kurosaki would ever hold a sword. It was Aizen who orchestrated the cruel experiments, using Shinigami as test subjects, forcing them into transformations that blurred the boundary between Hollow and Soul Reaper. Among them were captains and lieutenants, men and women who had once trusted him. Shinji himself was among those who suffered, turned into a vizard against his will. Yet when the dust settled, it was not Aizen who was blamed, but others. His illusions and manipulations crafted so carefully that he walked away untarnished, still cloaked in the mask of loyalty. That was the brilliance of Aizen Sosuke. He moved like a shadow, never rushing, never revealing his hand too soon. To the Central 46, he remained a dutiful officer. To the Gotei 13, he rose in rank, eventually taking the seat of captain of the 5th Division. His smile never faltered, his kindness never dimmed. But behind that smile, his ambitions grew sharper, his patience deeper. He was playing a game far larger than any around him could see. For Aizen did not simply want power. Power alone was meaningless to him. He sought to reshape existence itself, to unseat the Soul King and craft a reality where he would stand as the arbiter of order. To him, the Soul King was not a god, but a prison guard, holding the universe in chains. And where others bowed, Aizen dared to dream of rebellion. His eyes saw farther than the Seirete, farther than the human world, farther than Hueco Mundo itself. To him, the worlds were stepping stones, and he would climb them all until he stood above creation. And so, beneath the moonlight of Soul Society, the story of Aizen Sosuke began not with thunder or fire, but with quiet ambition. A man whose greatest weapon was not his sword, but his ability to make others believe in him. A man who understood patience as deeply as he understood power. His footsteps were soft, his words calm, but every move carried him closer to a future no one else could yet see. This was how the legend of Aizen began. A gentle smile, a quiet voice, and beneath it all, an ambition vast enough to shake the foundations of all worlds. As the decades drifted on, Aizen's mask of gentleness never wavered. He polished his reputation like a craftsman tending a blade, ensuring that no one saw the cracks beneath. The Gotei 13 was an organization built on loyalty, trust, and camaraderie. And in this atmosphere, Aizen's false kindness flourished. Young Shinigami admired him, fellow captains respected him, and subordinates leaned on him for reassurance. He carried the image of stability, of someone you could depend on in moments of doubt. Yet all the while, in the shadows of his own mind, he measured the weaknesses of those around him, catalogued their blind spots, and set the pieces of his plan slowly into motion. Kyoka Suigetsu made him untouchable. With its power of complete hypnosis, Aizen could rewrite the perceptions of anyone who saw it released. One glance, one moment, was enough for him to craft illusions that bent reality. He could make his enemies believe they struck him down, when in truth, their blades passed through air. He could vanish from sight, walk unnoticed among his comrades, or make allies strike each other without ever realizing they had been deceived. It was a power so absolute that its very existence seemed unfair. A Zanpakuto so perfect that only a mind like Aizen's could wield it to its fullest. But even Kyoka Suigetsu was only a tool. The true weapon was his patience. Many men with such a gift would rush toward dominance, eager to claim power openly, to bask in the fear of their enemies. Aizen understood better. He knew that the greater the ambition, the more carefully one must prepare. And so he waited. He smiled. He played the role of the loyal captain, leading the 5th Division with grace, appearing as the very model of composure. And in that silence, he dug deeper into forbidden research. The Hogyoku became his obsession. This mysterious device, created by Kisuke Urahara long ago, held the power to erase the boundary between Shinigami and Hollow. To Aizen, it was not merely a tool of transformation. It was the key to transcendence. If Shinigami could gain Hollow powers, if Hollows could cross into the realm of Shinigami, then the fragile lines that separated races and worlds could be obliterated. And if those boundaries crumbled, so too could the throne of the Soul King. For Aizen, the Hogyoku represented possibility, an opening in the walls of fate itself. He began by gathering loyal subordinates, men and women who did not question his words, who saw only his kindness and not the vast ambition behind it. Gin Ichimaru was one such figure, a sly and smiling lieutenant whose pale eyes revealed little, but whose cunning made him an invaluable ally. Alongside him was Kaname Tosen, a man whose hatred of injustice led him down a path where Aizen's rhetoric of reshaping the world sounded righteous. With these two at his side, Aizen began the slow and silent work of tearing soul society apart from within. Yet no revolution comes without risk. The visored incident of the past still lingered like a phantom, a reminder that Aizen's experiments could draw unwanted attention. But his skill in illusion kept him protected. When whispers arose, he was always 2 steps ahead. When doubts were raised, his calm explanations silenced them. He even allowed himself moments of visible vulnerability, moments where he appeared burdened by leadership or unsure of his own strength. These subtle acts ensured that suspicion never lingered. For who could doubt a man who seemed so human, so approachable? All the while, Aizen's eyes never wavered from the horizon. His plan was not to rule soul society as it was, such a role would be far too small, far too temporary. No, his goal was larger: to bring down the Soul King, to become the one who would stand above Ga and mortals alike, reshaping reality with his own hands. To accomplish this, he needed not just the Hogyoku, but an army. And where better to find such an army than Hueco Mundo, the world of hollows? It was there, in the endless white sands beneath the black sky, that Aizen saw opportunity. Hollows, the eternally hungry souls, were beings despised and hunted by Shinigami. Yet Aizen saw strength in their desperation, potential in their emptiness. If they could be tamed, if they could be elevated, then they could become soldiers capable of shaking soul society to its core. And so, his gaze turned outward, beyond the Seirei, beyond the living world, to the realm of monsters where he would craft an empire. The seeds of betrayal were sown quietly. He continued to serve as captain, his words measured, his kindness unwavering. He spoke with Momo Hinamori, his devoted lieutenant, always gently, always encouraging, binding her trust to him with threads she never realized were chains. To the other captains, he offered counsel, wisdom, and aid, his voice soft, and his smile warm. They did not see that beneath his robes he was already wearing the mantle of a traitor. And then, when the time was right, Aizen revealed his hand. The world of soul society, so secure in its traditions, so certain of its order, would be torn open in a single act of betrayal that echoed through every division. It was not enough for Aizen to leave quietly. He wanted his departure to be unforgettable, to shatter their illusion of safety in one decisive moment. The night of his betrayal came like thunder after years of silence. Blood was spilled, lies were unveiled, and trust was broken beyond repair. Aizen, once the gentle captain, was revealed as the architect of K, the mastermind who had walked among them all along. With Gin and Tosin at his side, he left soul society behind, stepping into Hueco Mundo as his true self, not a loyal Shinigami, but a king in waiting. For the first time, his smile was no longer gentle. It was the smile of a man who no longer needed to hide, of someone who had cast off his mask and stepped into the role he was always meant to play. This was the moment Aizen Sosuke began his open march toward godhood. When Aizen left soul society behind, he did not look back. For him, the Seirei was no longer a home nor a place of loyalty, but a prison that had bound his potential for far too long. With Gin Ichimaru at his side, his ever-smiling shadow, and Kaname Tosin, the man who had chosen justice, twisted into vengeance, Aizen stepped into the endless desert of Hueco Mundo. The sky above was a perpetual night, heavy with the glow of its white moon, while the sands stretched into infinity like a barren ocean. To others, it was a realm of emptiness, a place of beasts and suffering. But to Aizen, it was fertile ground. It was a kingdom waiting for a ruler, a people waiting to be reshaped. Hollows were creatures of hunger. Their existence was an endless cycle of devouring and despair. They knew nothing of order, only instinct, and yet, within them, lay potential. Aizen had studied this truth long before his open betrayal. He knew that hollows could evolve, that they could grow stronger, that in their emptiness was a possibility Shinigami had long ignored. To most of Soul Society, hollows were nothing but monsters to be destroyed. To Aizen, they were clay waiting for the hands of a sculptor. His first step was to demonstrate power. In Hueco Mundo, strength was law, and without dominance, he would be swallowed whole. But Aizen's strength was not merely in his blade. It was in his presence. The moment he stepped into that desolate realm, he carried himself as one who did not fear, who did not yield, who did not see the hollows as predators, but as pawns. Even the most savage among them sensed something different in him, something godlike. And with Kyoka Suigetsu, he could bend their perceptions until resistance seemed impossible. Yet it was not brute force that won Hueco Mundo. It was vision. For the first time, hollows heard a voice that did not condemn them as beasts, but offered them a future. Aizen spoke to them, not as a predator speaks to prey, but as a king speaks to his maple. He promised them strength, evolution, a chance to rise beyond their endless hunger. And in time, they listened. Some through fear, others through fascination, but all began to bend toward his will. The Arrancar project was the next step. Using the power of the Hogyoku, Aizen began fusing hollow essence with Shinigami qualities, peeling away their masks and unlocking the form of beings far greater than ordinary hollows. These became the Arrancar, soldiers who retained hollow power but carried humanoid forms and Shinigami-like abilities. Among them, he found figures of immense strength, individuals who could serve not just as tools, but as generals in his coming war. Thus were born the Espada, the top 10 Arrancar, chosen by their overwhelming power, each given a rank and a place at Aizen's side. Their abilities surpassed even that of most captains in the Gotei 13. And with them, Aizen forged an army unlike any the world had seen. To stand before the Espada was to stand before the pinnacle of hollow evolution. Beings whose strength and cruelty could match any foe. And above them all, calm and untouchable, sat Aizen Sosuke, their king, their creator, their god. But Aizen's rule was not based solely on fear. He understood the desires of those who followed him. To the Espada, he offered purpose beyond their endless hunger. To Tosen, he offered justice through revolution. To Gin, he gave the promise of a game yet unfinished, a chance to play in a world remade. Each follower believed they walked alongside him for their own reasons, yet in truth, they were all pieces on his board, moving according to his unseen hand. Back in Soul Society, the revelation of his betrayal sent shockwaves through every division. For the Shinigami, who had trusted him, who had admired him, it was a wound deeper than any blade could deliver. Hinamori Momo, his lieutenant who had adored him as both mentor and friend, was left shattered by the truth. She could not reconcile the image of the kind, soft-spoken captain with the traitor who had abandoned them. And in this heartbreak, Aizen found satisfaction. For every piece of trust broken was proof of his mastery, proof that no one had truly seen him for what he was. But Aizen's gaze remained ever forward. His plan required more than betrayal, more than an army. He sought the throne itself, the right to challenge the Soul King and claim creation as his own. To reach it, he needed not only the Hogyoku, but also the collapse of Soul Society's stability. War was inevitable, and Aizen intended not merely to win it, but to reshape the battlefield so thoroughly that his victory would seem ordained. And so, the pieces began to move. Espada clashed with captains, battles erupted across realms, and Ichigo Kurosaki, the unlikely boy from the human world, was drawn deeper into Aizen's web. For even this too had been considered. Aizen was not a man who left chance unattended. The very events that brought Ichigo into the world of Shinigami, the chain of circumstances that forged his power, were not accidents, but threads woven by Aizen himself. It was his hand that had pushed destiny forward, his design that had placed Ichigo at the center of it all. Because for Aizen, true power was not in reacting, it was in controlling. Every encounter, every battle, every rise of an enemy was something he had already anticipated. And each time his opponents believed they had uncovered his plan, they realized only too late that they were still moving in the palm of his hand. His illusions extended beyond Kyoka Suigetsu. They lived in his manipulation of fate itself. And yet, despite his godlike confidence, Aizen was not careless. He understood that even the smallest misstep could undo years of preparation. That was why he remained patient, why he built his empire in Hueco Mundo with care, why he revealed his power in increments rather than all at once. To his enemies, it seemed arrogance. To him, it was inevitability. The world would bend to his will, because no other will was strong enough to oppose it. The desert winds of Hueco Mundo whispered around him as he sat upon his throne of white stone, the Espada kneeling in his presence, Gin smiling with hidden motives, Tosen standing with quiet resolve. Here, in the heart of a world once thought desolate, Aizen Sosuke had built his kingdom. And soon, that kingdom would march against Soul Society. But even this was not the end. For Aizen's story was never about war alone. It was about transcendence, about a man who dared to reach beyond the heavens, who looked upon gods and saw them as flawed. And in the stillness of Hueco Mundo, beneath the eternal moon, he plotted the steps that would lead him there. Aizen's ascent toward godhood was not a sudden leap, but a carefully measured climb, each step calculated to mislead, to confuse, and to awe those who watched him. By the time he revealed his true nature, the Gote 13 had already been ensnared in his illusions, and his path forward seemed unstoppable. Yet even in his confidence, Aizen understood the necessity of patience. To rise above the Shinigami, he had to dismantle their world in such a way that resistance would appear futile, a mere struggle against inevitability. And so, while others saw only the sharp edges of his betrayal, Aizen himself viewed it as the unfolding of a greater narrative, a story that had been building since the moment he first laid eyes upon the Hogyoku. This forbidden object was more than a tool to him. It was the very key to transcending the natural order, the means by which he could bend existence to his will. As Aizen made his departure from Soul Society, it was not in the chaos of defeat, but with the serenity of one who had orchestrated every note in the song. He did not flee under pursuit. He ascended, rising through the skies toward Hueco Mundo, accompanied by Gin Ichimaru and Kaname Tosen, two men who in their own ways mirrored pieces of himself. Jin, the sly fox with a smile that concealed daggers, was a reflection of Aizen's talent for deception, his ability to wear masks until truth itself became indistinguishable. Tosen, by contrast, embodied conviction, an unwavering belief in justice, though twisted into Aizen's service. Together, the three became a dark trinity, stepping into the white desert realm where Aizen would craft his empire of hollows and Shinigami alike. Hueco Mundo was a barren, endless land under an eternal night sky. To most, it was a place of despair, devoid of warmth or beauty. But to Aizen, it was raw potential. He looked upon the scattered hollows not as monsters, but as resources, fragments of power awaiting refinement. His gaze turned toward Las Noches, the grand fortress that would become his seat of power. And with the Hogyoku pulsing faintly at his side, he began to reshape the hollows into Arankars, tearing away their masks and giving them humanoid form. It was in this act that Aizen demonstrated the first glimpses of his godlike ambition, not merely ruling over Hueco Mundo, but transforming its inhabitants, remaking them in an image that blurred the lines between predator and soldier. The Arankar army that arose was unlike anything Soul Society had faced before. Each one was a fusion of hollow savagery and Shinigami-like abilities, sharpened into weapons by Aizen's design. Among them, the Espada emerged. 10 warriors of immense strength, ranked according to their power. These were not random creations, but chosen pieces in his strategy, each one intended to challenge and overwhelm the captains of the Gote 13. To those under his rule, Aizen appeared as a benefactor, lifting them from the chaos of their hollow existence and granting them purpose. Yet beneath the surface, it was always control. He fed their ambitions while binding them to his will, ensuring that even in their rebellion, they served his greater scheme. Back in Soul Society, the captains and lieutenants who once believed in his calm leadership now reeled in the aftermath of betrayal. The wound Aizen left was not just physical, but psychological, shaking the very foundation of their unity. If someone like Aizen could deceive them for so long, what other truths might be hidden in the shadows? This doubt was his true weapon, lingering long after his departure. Even as they planned to confront him, many wondered whether their eyes, their instincts, or even their trust in one another could be relied upon. Aizen's illusions had become more than techniques. They were a state of mind imposed upon his enemies. As he consolidated power in Hueco Mundo, Aizen's thoughts stretched further still. He did not intend to remain confined to one realm. His sights were set upon the royal palace, the hidden domain of the Soul King himself. For Aizen, the Soul King represented stagnation, a being who sat at the center of creation without purpose, worshipped as a god, but serving no true function. To overthrow this figure was not only rebellion, but what Aizen considered progress, the breaking of chains that bound existence to an order he found flawed. He believed himself the one destined to replace that immobile god, not as a caretaker, but as an architect of something greater. Yet even in his confidence, subtle cracks could be found. His reliance on the Hogyoku was one such fracture. Though he spoke of transcending all limits, he was inextricably tied to the power of that small, glowing orb. It was not merely a tool he wielded. It was a force that whispered promises to him, guiding his ambition even as it responded to his desires. This bond would later blur the line between who commanded whom, Aizen shaping the Hogyoku, or the Hogyoku shaping Aizen. Still, in this moment, his control appeared absolute, and the Gote 13 could only wait for the storm he was preparing to unleash. Thus, Aizen's story entered its next phase, not a tale of simple betrayal, but of empire building, of hollow and Shinigami fused into an army that reflected his vision of a world without boundaries. And within the silent halls of Las Noches, Aizen's calm voice carried through the corridors, speaking of destiny, of inevitability, and of a throne waiting beyond the heavens. He did not raise his voice, for he did not need to. Every word was a command, every breath a declaration that his ascent was no longer a possibility, but a certainty. And while Soul Society gathered its strength, Aizen prepared to show them that resistance itself was just another illusion. In the white silence of Hueco Mundo, Aizen's dominion began to take shape, not through chaos, but through order, an order only he could define. Las Noches, his towering fortress, gleamed like an ivory crown upon the barren sands, and within its endless corridors, the footsteps of Arrancar echoed as both soldiers and subjects. Yet even amidst this imposing architecture, it was Aizen's presence that shaped reality most profoundly. He walked with the composure of one who no longer viewed himself as a mere man, and his subordinates, from the lowest hollow to the highest-ranked espada, could not help but feel the weight of his gaze. To them, he was not simply a leader. He was inevitability made flesh. The espada themselves were unlike any force Soul Society had encountered. Each represented not only raw strength, but also an embodiment of concepts, aspects of death-given form. Ulquiora's cold detachment, Grimjow's hunger, Barragan's authority, Stark's loneliness. These were not accidents of evolution, but reflections of truths Aizen understood too well. He had chosen them carefully, elevating them to their ranks, ensuring that each would stand as a mirror to the human condition, distorted through the lens of hollow existence. In this, his genius lay not merely in their creation, but in the symbolism they carried, a reminder that even monsters could be made to serve an order greater than themselves. And yet, despite their formidable nature, the espada were not his equals. They were tools, sharp, deadly, but expendable. Aizen's true strength did not rest in the swords of his followers, but in the illusions that bound them all. Kyoka Suigetsu remained his greatest weapon, a blade that cut not flesh, but perception. With it, he controlled not only the battlefield, but the very reality his enemies occupied. Against such power, loyalty became irrelevant, rebellion meaningless. Even should an espada grow restless or question his motives, they could not act with certainty, for they could not trust their own senses in his presence. In this way, Aizen ruled with an invisible hand, his power less about violence and more about control. Meanwhile, in the quiet heart of Soul Society, the captains and lieutenants began to prepare. Aizen's betrayal had shaken them deeply, but it had also unified them in their determination. Yamamoto, the old fire himself, understood better than anyone the gravity of what had been unleashed. For centuries, threats had arisen and been contained, but Aizen was something different. He was not a storm to be weathered, but a mind that plotted far beyond their comprehension. To face him would not be a matter of strength alone, but of willpower, of clarity amidst deception. And so, the Gotei 13 braced for a war unlike any before. In Karakura town, far from the endless deserts of Hueco Mundo, Ichigo Kurosaki continued to grow. His encounters with hollows, with Soul Society, and with his own inner hollow had forged him into something more than human. He was not yet a match for Aizen, not yet a piece Aizen considered truly dangerous, but he was becoming a thread woven into the tapestry of inevitability. And Aizen, watching from afar, acknowledged this development with a kind of detached amusement. He did not fear Ichigo. He welcomed him. For Aizen believed that only in facing such opposition could his ascension be properly defined. What was a god without challengers to stand before him? As Aizen's plans advanced, he began to move his pieces onto the board of the living world. The Hogyoku pulsed with quiet energy, reshaping Arrancar and solidifying his hold. One by one, battles unfolded between the Espada and the Shinigami, each encounter a test of resolve and strength. In these clashes, the balance of power shifted like sand beneath the tide. Victories and defeats were less important than the psychological weight they carried. Each captain who fell, each Espada who revealed their full power, reminded Soul Society of the scale of the war they now faced. It was no longer simply about protecting order. It was about survival against a vision that sought to rewrite existence itself. Yet even amidst the roar of combat, Aizen remained calm. He rarely moved, rarely raised his hand, content instead to observe as though the battlefield were a theater and he its playwright. Every defeat his army suffered, he turned into an opportunity. Every victory, Soul Society claimed, only served to push them deeper into his design. For Aizen understood that the purpose of war was not merely to win, but to exhaust, to strip away certainty until only his vision remained standing. He was less concerned with the present battles than with the inevitable confrontation that lay ahead, the moment when he would face those who dared oppose him, and show them how small their resistance truly was. Still, the mask of absolute control was not without its hidden fractures. Jin Ichimaru, always smiling, always silent, lingered at Aizen's side with the air of a shadow. His loyalty was unquestioned on the surface, but his true intentions remained veiled even to Aizen, who prided himself on understanding every heart. Kaname-tosen, too, carried with him a conviction that, though aligned with Aizen's for now, might not withstand the strain of their path forever. These uncertainties were not enough to unsettle Aizen, but they were whispers in the dark, threads that hinted the tapestry was not as flawless as he portrayed. And so, as Las Noches hummed with restless power, as Soul Society braced for storms yet to come, and as Karakura town sat unaware upon the threshold of invasion, Aizen continued his patient ascent. He was a figure both detached and all-encompassing, a man who walked as though the world already belonged to him. Every step, every word, every illusion woven through Kyoka Suigetsu was a reminder that his reign was not confined to the desert, nor to the battlefield, nor even to the minds of those who opposed him. His reign existed in the inevitability of his vision, in the quiet certainty that, sooner or later, all would kneel before the order he sought to impose. Thus, the stage was set. The pieces were in place. And as the sands of Hueco Mundo stretched endlessly beneath an eternal night sky, Aizen Sosuke stood at the center of it all, serene and unshaken, waiting only for the moment when the curtain would rise on the final act of his grand design. The war between Aizen's Arrancar and Soul Society soon spilled into its most delicate stage. Karakura Town, a place where the living moved unaware of the vast currents surrounding them, became the focal point of a struggle that would decide more than just victory. For Aizen, Karakura was not simply territory. It was the keystone of his plan to overthrow the heavens. Within this ordinary town, he sought to create the Oken, the key that would open the door to the Soul King's palace. With that, the throne of existence itself would be within reach. To this end, he transported Karakura into the white desert of Hueco Mundo, leaving only a replica behind. The townsfolk, displaced and hidden away by Kisuke Urahara's foresight, never knew how close they came to annihilation. Their lives continued quietly, while in the hollowed halls of Las Noches and the streets of the false Karakura, titans prepared to clash. Aizen's calm voice explained the inevitability of what was to come, and with Kyoka Suigetsu ever at his side, his confidence seemed unshakable. The captains and lieutenants, led by Yamamoto's fire, entered battle determined to halt him. Espada and Shinigami collided in duels that tore apart the landscape. Soe Fon's speed lashed against Barragan's suffocating time. Komamura's loyalty and rage faced Tosen's blinded justice. Shunsui Kyoraku, playful yet deadly, clashed with Stark's lonely desolation. Each battle was not just a test of strength, but a revelation of the truths Aizen had assembled into his army, the truths of death itself. And amidst it all, Ichigo Kurasaki's journey reached new heights. The boy who had stumbled into Soul Society to save a friend now stood as a protector of the world itself. But even as he fought and struggled, Aizen scarcely glanced at him. For Aizen saw Ichigo not as a threat, but as a symbol of what was to come. In Ichigo, he saw a being shaped by conflict, honed by impossible battles, and pushed beyond human limits. Aizen did not seek to destroy Ichigo. He sought to witness what he might become, for in that evolution lay proof of Aizen's philosophy. Conflict created growth, and growth revealed truth. The Espada fell one by one. Jin watched with his sly smile, never revealing his heart. Tosen embraced hollow power and was struck down by his former comrades. And through it all, Aizen barely lifted his blade. His presence was overwhelming without effort, his illusions spreading confusion through the battlefield. Even the most seasoned captains faltered before him, unable to trust their own eyes, their own instincts. Every strike they thought landed was revealed to be nothing but a dream. Every opening they thought they found dissolved like mist. And then, when the dust of battle began to settle, Aizen himself stepped forward. With the Hogyoku pulsing at his side, he began to ascend. His body shifted, transcending the limits of Shinigami and Hollow alike. His form became something unearthly, serene, yet monstrous. He had discarded the need for the illusions of men. For now, he was something greater, something approaching divinity. To those who still stood against him, he appeared no longer as a rival, but as a being to be endured, like a storm or a natural law. The captains attacked with everything they had. Yamamoto's fire blazed hotter than it had in centuries, threatening to consume the town itself if it meant stopping Aizen. Urahara's mind worked tirelessly, traps and seals unfolding like layers of a labyrinth. Even Isshin Kurosaki, Ichigo's father, revealed himself as a former captain and entered the fray. Together, they pushed back against the impossible, their combined wills refusing to yield. And yet, Aizen continued to evolve. Each strike that landed only seemed to further his transformation, as though resistance itself was fuel for his growth. Through this chaos, Jin Ichimaru made his move. His blade, Shinso, shot forth in a flash, piercing Aizen at his most vulnerable. For a heartbeat, it seemed the unthinkable had happened, that Aizen had been undone by betrayal, by the one man who had stood at his side from the beginning. Jin's smile softened, revealing the truth he had hidden for so long. His loyalty had never been to Aizen, but to Rangaku, to the life Aizen had stolen from her long ago. With Shinso's secret ability, Jin sought to end the tyrant once and for all. But the Hogyoku would not allow it. The orb responded to Aizen's will, knitting him back together, pushing him further into transcendence. Jin was struck down, his gamble failing, his life fading in Rangiku's arms. And Aizen, far from weakened, emerged stronger still, his form twisting further beyond recognition. It was a moment of despair, a reminder that this was not a man they fought, but something becoming a god. Yet amidst this despair, Ichigo returned. His training in the Dangai precipice world had changed him. The boy who had struggled against hollows and Espada now walked with a silence that rivaled Aizen's own. His new power, born not of ambition, but of necessity, carried a weight that even Aizen could not ignore. For the first time, Aizen looked upon Ichigo not with amusement, but with interest. Perhaps here, at last, was the confrontation that could give meaning to his ascension. And so the two stood across from one another. Aizen, the man who sought to overturn the heavens, and Ichigo, the boy who carried the burden of protecting everything. Around them, the battlefield hushed. Captains, lieutenants, and Espada alike seemed to fade into the background, their struggles now secondary to this inevitable clash. The air itself grew heavy, charged with anticipation. For in this moment, all threads converged. The war, the betrayals, the transformations, all led here, as Aizen's eyes narrowed and Ichigo's steady gaze held firm. The world seemed to pause. The next act was not simply a battle. It was the question of existence itself, a test of whether a man could truly rise above gods, or whether the heart of a human could resist the inevitability of ascension. And in the silence before the storm, the fate of countless lives hung upon the edge of two blades. The final clash between Aizen and Ichigo began not with a thunderous strike, but with silence. In that stillness, the difference between them was palpable. Aizen stood as a being no longer tethered to mortality, his body reshaped by the Hogyoku into something beyond definition. His presence warped the air, a pressure that bent reality itself. Ichigo, in contrast, stood calm, his new power quiet, unassuming. Yet within that calm, there was a density, a gravity that seemed to steady the world itself. It was not the confidence of arrogance, but the assurance of one who had already resolved himself completely. Aizen moved first, his blade striking with speed that shattered the ground. His voice echoed with disdain, speaking of inevitability, of how Ichigo's resistance was nothing but a delay before the natural order of his ascension. But Ichigo parried with ease. The strike that should have torn mountains apart stopped in his hand, met with an unyielding stillness. In that moment, Aizen's eyes flickered, not with fear, but with the dawning realization that the boy before him was not playing the role Aizen had written for him. Ichigo was not merely another pawn, nor even a rival. He was something Aizen had not foreseen, a presence that stood outside the script entirely. The two clashed, each blow sending ripples through the false Karakura. Buildings crumbled like sand. The sky tore open with the pressure of their strikes. Yet through it all, Ichigo remained calm, his steps measured, his movements efficient. Aizen, for all his transcendent power, found himself pressing harder, striking faster, his voice rising as though he could bend Ichigo's will with words as well as steel. He spoke of gods, of thrones, of the futility of protecting a world so flawed. But Ichigo did not answer with speeches. His silence was his defiance. Each quiet motion said more than words ever could, that he fought not for glory nor for power, but simply because it was right. Aizen unleashed the full extent of the Hogyoku's gift, his body twisting further into forms that defied comprehension. He became monstrous, radiant, divine all at once, a being less like a man and more like a concept given flesh. And still, Ichigo met him. The boy's blade, forged from the essence of his own soul, cut through each manifestation. The more Aizen evolved, the more Ichigo revealed that his power was not born from ascension, but from acceptance. The acceptance of his humanity, his hollow, his Quincy blood, his Shinigami spirit. He had united what Aizen had sought to transcend. At last, Ichigo unleashed his most devastating technique, final Getsuga Tensho. His hair darkened, his form shifted, and he became the technique itself. This was not merely power. It was sacrifice, the giving up of all his strength to achieve victory. The air trembled as the black torrent of energy roared forward, engulfing Aizen completely. It was a force that tore through illusions, through divinity, through inevitability. And for the first time, Aizen felt the weight of defeat pressing upon him. Yet even as the darkness receded, the Hogyoku stirred once more. It healed him, reshaping him again, refusing to let him fall. But this time, it did not act with blind obedience. It responded to the cracks in Aizen's soul, to the truths he had buried beneath layers of control. For within him, doubt had begun to bloom. He had seen Ichigo's resolve, felt the weight of sacrifice, and in that quiet moment, the Hogyoku understood what its master could not admit. Aizen was not ready to be a god. Urahara's seal activated, the Kido layers binding Aizen where he stood. Weakened by Ichigo's strike, shaken by the Hogyoku's judgment, he could no longer resist. Chains of light wrapped around him, dragging him down, stripping away his monstrous forms until only the man remained. His eyes, once filled with disdainful certainty, now held something unfamiliar. Surprise, perhaps even the faintest glimmer of regret. As the captains gathered, battered and bloodied, they looked upon Aizen not with triumph, but with weariness. This was not a victory won easily, nor one without cost. Ichigo, his power spent, collapsed to the ground, his strength fading like a candle in the wind. He had given everything, and though he had stopped Aizen, he knew the scars of this battle would remain forever. Aizen, bound and kneeling, still spoke with the voice of a man unwilling to yield. He declared that none of them could understand him, that the Soul King's throne was an empty mockery. He cursed the stillness of the heavens, the stagnation of an existence ruled by a silent monarch. In his words, there was no repentance, only defiance. And yet, in the silence that followed, those who listened could not help but sense the loneliness buried beneath his fury. Aizen had sought to rise above all, but in doing so, he had severed himself from the very bonds that gave meaning to power. Taken away to face judgment, he was sealed deep within the confines of the Muken, the lowest level of the Soul Society's prison. There, in eternal solitude, his power bound and his body chained, he would remain. But even in that silence, he did not despair. For Aizen, Sosuke was not a man who surrendered to fate. In the darkness, his mind continued to turn. His eyes still saw beyond the veil. Whether he would remain forever in chains, or one day walk free again, was a question left unanswered. A quiet whisper lingering in the halls of eternity. And so his story closed, not with a scream, nor with a final victory, but with an unresolved stillness. Aizen had sought divinity and touched its edge, but it slipped from him like mist. Ichigo had risen, sacrificed, and stood firm, proving that the strength of a heart could surpass the ambition of a god. The war had ended, but the questions remained. Was Aizen truly wrong to seek change in a stagnant cosmos? Or was his downfall the inevitable fate of one who sought to walk alone, denying the ties that give life meaning? These questions lingered, soft and unanswered, as though meant to lull the listener into thought, into quiet reflection. Aizen Sosuke's tale was not merely one of betrayal or ambition. It was a meditation on the cost of vision, on the line between godhood and isolation, and on the unyielding truth that even the mightiest cannot escape the weight of their own heart.